Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. I'm very excited to have today's guest, Tom Suggs, N4MTE. Tom serves on the Parks on the Air board with me. I've been working with him now for the past year and a half, and again, very excited to have him join me. This episode is brought to you by DX Engineering, supporting amateur radio operators worldwide with the gear and expertise to get you on the air. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So, Tom, before we get into Parks on the Air and your board leadership, I'm really curious how you got started with ham radio.
Okay, yeah, it goes way back. I had an uncle back in Mississippi that was ham, very big in the DX world. I think he worked every country there was back in the day. And when I would go visit, I would always go back, visit him in his shack. One day he let me talk to someone. And his instructions to me were, ask this guy where he is. And when I did, the guy said Norway. And that just intrigued me. I've always liked maps. I've always liked weather. I've liked all the things that go into ham radio, apparently. So, but that got me started. And then when I turned 13, I think, it was right in the middle of the CB radio boom. And I was really big into that. I had a license there, actually. I was KWQ 3960. Most folks may not remember that you had to be licensed even to be on CB back in the day. And my handle was Silver Bullet, probably one of millions that had that handle. I loved that aspect of it. And then, so ham was just kind of a natural progression for me there. And finally got licensed in 1985 when I was living in Louisiana.
And in 1985, you did not have this call sign. You had a different call sign.
Correct. I was N5IQI at the time. I was living in Five Land, and I didn't get N4MTE until only about 6 or 7 years ago.
You know, one of the things I love about ham radio, Tom, is that there's so many different parts of it. When I'm trying to answer somebody's question on the street, what is ham radio? It's just so hard because there's so many different directions. So I'm curious, back in the mid 80s, what was your primary interest?
I worked for 41 years in the electric utility business. And so I had a pretty nice base station there at the house. I had a pretty nice shack. And when I would be up in the middle of the night dispatching crews and things, I couldn't go back to bed because I had men out working. And so I'd turn the radio on and tune around. So a lot of DX, a lot of Australia and those guys at 2 in the morning back in the day. And so I kind of got into DX some. I liked the contest some. Of course, Parks on the Air wasn't a thing at the time. So a good contest would come up and I'd work as many as I could. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what I did back then. A little bit of digital, even back in the day, the old RTTY stuff. I really enjoyed that once I got into it.
So I didn't realize you had a contesting background.
You know, not as a active participant where I submit my logs and those, unless it's for a check log, that kind of thing. But I enjoy getting on there and working new places.
So in the mid 80s, as you said, Parks on the Air wasn't even a dream for anybody. When did you first intersect with Parks on the Air?
We moved to Tennessee in 1999, and I was fortunate enough, and that's not meant seriously, to move into an HOA neighborhood. So I was off the air for about 10 years. And when I got back on, I didn't do a whole lot because, it just didn't grab me like it used to. So I got into metal detecting. I was doing some other things. But in 2018, I think it was, I was listening and tuning around, and I heard a guy calling CQ Parks on the Air, or CQ POTA. I had no idea what it was. Nobody was answering him. You know, back then it was kind of rare, and so it was hard to get contact. So the guy sounded like he needed contact, so I came back to him, and he explained the program to me. I wish I could remember who it was because it's probably somebody that everyone knows. But he explained it to me, and I said, well, that sounds interesting. And I had a radio that I could very easily convert to a portable setup. So I got a battery and a little tripod and a whip and said, I'll go try it here at my local national battlefield that's about a half a mile from where I live. And that was all it took.
And tell me how that progressed from there. What did your activations, your hunting look like?
I don't do a lot of hunting anymore. I usually, when I get into my office and actually have time, I'm typically planning my next road for activations. I like to do multi-day, 6 or 7 days at a time, maybe hit 70 or 80 parks. And that's getting more and more challenging because it takes so long for me now to get to parks that I haven't done. It's 3 or 4 hours in any direction to get to a cluster at least of any that I haven't done. So I started off with just the ones around here. Those awards are kind of like candy. And so I got my 10 parks that I activated, and 20 didn't seem that far away, and I had that many around close. So I did those, and then just started kind of easing into it. And before you know it, you're 2 or 3 states away, and you're doing the same thing.
I can relate to part of this, Tom. I have some parks in my backyard that I really enjoy, but what I really like doing is finding new parks. And as I started to activate more of the parks in my backyard and within a 60-mile radius, then it becomes somewhat of a chore to make sure you put together a good itinerary where you can hit all these parks. So I totally understand what you're doing there. But you also said you're crossing state lines, so you've really expanded well beyond the home state.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. At one time, before new parks were added, I had activated all the parks in Mississippi, Tennessee, and Indiana. And I've got some friends in Indiana, and I tell them about roads and places that they didn't know existed in their own state. They've lived there their whole life. You get out and start covering some of these states, and you see a lot of interesting things. But I think one of my next goals now is to try to activate from all 50. I've got 38 right now, and hopefully, Alaska is soon on my list. We'll see how that works out. That's going to be a tough one. But yeah, crossing state lines is almost a given for me now if I'm going to get out and get any parks.
So, Tom, it seems incredible that there would be a ham radio operator anywhere in the world that hasn't heard of parks in the air. But let's assume for a second there is one. How would you describe it to them?
Well, from my perspective, it combines several things that I'm interested in. So, I try to appeal, maybe not first of all, even to the radio stuff. I ask people, if they enjoy history, do they enjoy travel? As an activator, you're going to see a lot of the world. You're going to have to plan things. You're going to have to know about the park. So that's kind of an offshoot of it that might pique their interest a little bit more before just jumping into the technical aspects of radio. And even as a hunter, you're going to work some places that name is interesting on that park. I wonder what that's about. And so just to maybe set the hook a little bit, kind of talk about the fact that it's not just something radio related, because in my experience, that's turned a lot of people, I won't say turned them off, but they glaze over a little bit because they immediately go to radio theory and those kind of things. And that's not what Parks on the Air is all about.
And how would you explain the explosive growth that Parks on the Air has experienced?
Wow. I can't even believe it, first of all, much less explain it. But I think community was a word that I would use that really describes a lot of the Parks on the Air. The growth, just if you go to a ham fest or anywhere where hams are grouped together and they talk about Parks on the Air, it's typically 99% of the time it's positive conversations, and like me, I have several that I would consider regulars that when I'm out activating that will hunt me, and I greatly appreciate that, because obviously we can't, as activators, we can't accomplish anything without the hunters out there. But you get to know these folks, and then when you see them, you get to meet them in person, those kind of things. But also, I think it's the bar to entry is pretty low. I mean, especially to be a hunter, if you're already a ham and on the air, you got everything you need. And so you can ease into it there. It's not like a big international contest or something, or trying to do moon bounce or something where you've got to have all this great big technical stuff to even get started. You can dip your toe in the water and then see what it is that you like about it. If you want to be a hunter, you want to be an activator, if you want to just work on the the parks that are close to you, if you want to work on the ones that are new to you. All these different avenues are available, and I think that just contributes to all of it.
And Tom, you've obviously been around Parks in the Air long enough to have been intersecting with Jason Johnson, W3 Alpha Alpha X-Ray, one of the founders of Parks in the Air and our leader for a long time. Tell me about the transition that he initiated from somewhat of a sole leadership concept to the board that is now formed with Parks in the Air.
I was fortunate enough to meet Jason not long after I really got into the program. He was one of the first contacts that I made. I didn't really know who he was at the time. I just knew the call sign, and then I'd see his name on things. And he was kind of like, it's kind of like meeting a celebrity when you sit down at a table and we're eating dinner with Jason Johnson at the table. And so, I soaked all that in. And first of all, I was just tremendously impressed with what he and the rest of the team had put together. He being the most well-known face, I think, of the program at the time. But, I think it just got to be too much for one man, for any man. No, it'd be too much for Superman. And so, it was time, with the explosive growth that you talked about, it was time for a new governance model and to kind of share that load somewhat. And, I think the way it was done, it could have been done several ways, I assume, but the way it was done makes a lot of sense and seems to have been pretty well received throughout the POTA community. So, I'm hopeful that I'm correct on that and that we're moving forward in the way that's going to be make the program more successful.
So, Tom, for the sake of the viewers, tell us what was done. What was that transition like? And tell the viewers about the board that has been formed.
Well, the board, first of all, it's made up of some really, really talented people. And it's interesting to me because as I sit back and look at who's on the board, it's a split about half. There's people that have been with the program since the inception, and they bring a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of skills that are directly related to getting the program up and running, that sort of thing. And then there's the other half. There's people like us. You obviously bring a great communication background. We have attorneys. We have other skill sets on the board that I think round out what a board should be. So not only do we not have all the power, I hate to say power, we don't have all the control, concentrated in one person, and rightfully so due to the complexities and all that exist. We have a team together that there's no two on the team that are identical. And so there's lots of different perspectives. We don't always agree. We disagree respectfully, though, and we come to consensus, and we try to move forward. And there's a lot to deal with, right? I mean, you know this. There's a lot to deal with, a lot on our plates, and we can't do everything at once. But I think the experience level, the maturity levels, and all on the board recognize, that we need to prioritize some things and bite off things in meaningful pieces, but also pieces that are manageable. And so I think we've got a good team in place to do that.
It's worth mentioning, too, again, that Parks on the Air is a 100% volunteer organization. The board is volunteering their time. I think all of our fellow board members have other things going on, sometimes many other things going on. So I think that it's been an interesting process this past year and a half just to work on some of the fundamental governance issues as well as the more niggling issues that show up. But we've made a lot of progress. What would you say to that about the work that we've done in the past, say, year and a half?
Oh, absolutely. When you set up a new governance structure and you need to formalize something, that takes time. And there's things that have to happen in certain sequences, and there's paperwork to be filed and things to be set up. And those are not glamorous. They're not a lot of fun. They don't show up on the leaderboards. They don't show up on the air. But they make the program officially run. And so, I think we've spent probably a good bit of the first year, in that arena. We dive off into some other things that we could knock out. But, but hopefully we've got some of that stuff behind us now, and things are set up now. The donations, the the tax exempt status stuff that people just don't think about. And you also mentioned volunteers. It's not just us, right? I mean, there are so many people. One of the biggest shocks to me as a new board member was learning how many people there are behind the scenes that are volunteering their time and their expertise to making this stuff happen. It's an incredible example of a volunteer organization.
I absolutely agree. And, I certainly want to double down on that comment. We have 7 board members. I think we're all working hard, but there are so many other dozens of people that we're leaning upon to actually help us out and help us make the right decisions, but more importantly, move those decisions forward. And I also want to underscore this idea that a lot of the tasks we've done this past year are not glamorous at all, but very, very necessary. I think it's the quiet sort of stuff that happens in any organization, any business, any religious organization, any organization you can think of. There are infrastructure issues that need to happen day in and day out that maybe the overall membership doesn't see or appreciate. But let's move on to some of the challenges that Parks on the Air has moving ahead. Some of the things that you think are going to be top on the list for the board and for the volunteer base to think about, say, over the next 6 to 12 months, Tom.
Okay. Well, growth certainly always brings challenges. It doesn't matter if I'm in my role back when I was doing the utility work. Growth meant substations that had to be built. In this world, growth means database stuff and other processes. So that's always going to be a challenge because there's cost, not just dollar cost. There's resource cost, volunteer cost, those kind of things that factor into that. I think we need to get a grip. I'm transitioning quite a bit here, but I think we need to get a grip on some of the basic fundamentals of how POTA is intended to be done, if you will, as a hunter, as an activator. We have very few rules. That was always the intention, was to have very few rules. But we seem to have, in some cases, a lot more interpretations of those rules than really I think the board is comfortable with. And I think a lot of the users are comfortable with, because we hear from people from time to time that want clarification on something they've seen on Facebook or they've heard on the air. And I think there's some of those items that we need to look at. And that's going to take some time to make sure that we're thoughtful to that. I also think, we've got a new version of the POTA app that's coming out that everyone basically uses. And so looking really forward to seeing what that's all about. I know everyone that's listening is looking forward to that. I think there will be aspects of that'll be on our plate. We've run into, as you know, we run into some things being an international organization that we probably didn't anticipate. The United States has rules and laws and requirements on things. Other countries do too, and they don't always line up exactly. And so we have to make sure that we're consistent and fair and legal in all the things that we do. So I think we'll grapple with that a little bit as we go on. I'm sure there's quite a few others.
So, Tom, one of the things that I've said a number of times in these conversations is that the board intends to have a light touch, and I think that you probably agree with that. We don't want to be putting through grandiose new programs. We want the program to be solid and almost invisible to the operators. But there is an ongoing tension that you sort of referred to a minute ago, and that is between the My Activation, My Way group and then the others that are also in communication with us that say, sure, I love that idea, but can we just follow those simple rules? Could you address that kind of the tension that exists between My Activation, My Way and this idea that we just have 2 or 3 simple rules that make it a lot more fun for people?
Yeah, well, I mean, the program is the Parks on the Air program, and there are rules that are associated with it. There's not many, but there are rules. And so if you're going to play POTA and do it quote unquote correctly, you should abide by those rules. Now, I think we've got some issues where maybe the rules aren't clear all the time, and we may need to address some things from that standpoint. But I hate to use the term bad actors, but you have bad actors in every walk of life, every business, everything that you deal with sometimes. And there may always be people that say, I don't care what the rules are, I'm going to do it my way. To your light touch comment, yeah, we're not going to be out there looking at every activation and every contact that gets uploaded into the database to see if we can find a problem with it. We're certainly not going to do that. If we find someone that is grossly abusing the program, let's say someone claims 4 activations and we know for a fact they were sitting at home when they did it. Okay, that may be a different question, and people may laugh about that, but that's not that far-fetched. I'm sorry to say, and so there will be a tension. There is tension there somewhat, but in reality, we're going to come down on the side of keeping it simple, being consistent, and following the rules. That's Parks on the Air. In my opinion, if you want to do something else, start another program.
And Tom, if we were to get together and have the same conversation a year from now, what would you say today success would look like? What are the goals that you hope to achieve as a board member over the next, say, 12 months?
Well, I hope some of the things we just talked about are behind us. That we have clarity around the rules, that we have, hopefully the new system will be up and running, but there's no guarantee of that. Again, back to volunteer labor, and you're kind of at the mercy of what people can squeeze in. Their time is limited. So, well, that would be extreme success, I think, if we were to look in the rearview mirror and say we've got that done. But clarity around the rules, and in reality, if we have a successful year, we should be looking about this time next year and saying there's really not a whole lot for us to be working on, right? I mean, once you get it going, getting something started, a new structure, all the things that go along with that, it does take time. But once you get it going, it should pretty much it's organic. So hopefully, success will look like our phone calls are somewhat shorter and with fewer agenda items than we typically have.
I was not expecting that answer, but I really appreciate that, Tom. I'd like to see the board retire in a year because we've solved everything. That's a great goal. I really appreciate it. Tom, before we wrap up, are there any other things that deserve being mentioned?
Probably so. I mean, again, I would shout out to the volunteers and as an activator that really loves to activate. Thank you to all the hunters, obviously, but thank you to the board. It's just a great program. There's nothing else like it in ham radio right now, and I don't know that there ever will be again. And so we need to. Everyone needs to keep it at the forefront of what this has accomplished, what we've built, and what it can be, and it's just been fantastic.
Well, I really want to second the idea of volunteers. I've been involved with Parks on the Air now for a few years, and I've always been asking myself, with any organization, what makes them successful, whether it be profit, nonprofit, and I always come back to this idea that we have such a commitment of volunteers and to volunteers. And you're right. Sometimes the downside of that is things don't happen overnight like they would in an organization where people get paid. But our strength is the fact that people are volunteering their time to do this. And I'm talking about all walks of life. As you mentioned, we have obviously a great IT team doing the development work, but we have attorneys on the board. We have communication experts. We have people from every walk of life that are contributing to this. And I think they add a richness that I've never experienced in anything else in my life, either in the corporate world or the nonprofit world. So absolutely right about that.
Yes.
Well, Tom, I appreciate you taking some time today to have this conversation. I'm sure I'm going to see you soon at the next Parks on the Air board meeting. That's not going to be that far off. But thank you again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. This has been Q5 Ham Radio. I've been talking to Tom Suggs, N4MTE, as part of my Meet the Board Parks on the Air series 73.